Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're logging in from the world. Welcome to this session on DevOps with the Soul. Why spiritual practices are crucial for a large scale CI/CD rollout. My name is Savinder Puri and I'm currently a DevOps evangelist with a bank in Eastern Europe. I'm based out of India and I work remotely. I started off my career way back in the year 2000 with a degree in computer science. In the past about 2+ decades, I've had the great opportunity to work with diverse organizations across UK and Europe, US and South Africa, and of course India. I'm also an ambassador at CDF, Continuous Delivery Foundation, and DevOps Institute. I also run a YouTube channel where I try and merge DevOps and spirituality together. I would highly recommend you to check it out. Along the way, I've also managed to write 2 books, How to Build a Career in DevOps and How to Merge Spirituality and Success. So let's come to the topic today about spirituality and success in a large-scale DevOps rollout. Now, I'm sure you've had a look at this figure. This is the poster child of success of DevOps at Netflix, where they talk about at one point hundreds of microservices, thousands of daily production changes, tens of thousands of virtual instances, supported by probably tens of engineers and 0 network ops centers. Now, this is a slightly dated slide, but you get the context. This is what DevOps has been harping about. This is the success of DevOps in all its glory. You've also probably seen this, the DevSecOps reference architecture, very kindly put together by the folks at Sonatype. It talks about the complexity of DevSecOps and how large-scale organizations have adopted bits and pieces of this architecture across the value chain. You've also probably had a chance to look at this, which is the periodic table of DevOps tools developed by digital.ai, and it talks about the plethora of tools and technologies in the DevOps landscape today. And I'm sure you already work for or know of organization which use a bunch of these tools for their successful DevOps transformation story. Now, these are the successes. I'm also sure that you have seen or are people like this. These are the people who started off DevOps in all its glory, in one team, in one silo, in one organization, and tried to scale it up across the organization, and it didn't really go as planned. What went wrong? What were the issues? Because when you are doing DevOps, you are doing a bunch of things. You are doing agile at scale. You are implementing various shapes and forms of branching strategies. And you're linking your branching strategy to your user story to a release. You are putting in place CI/CD pipelines in some of the teams. You are institutionalizing CI/CD. You're probably also looking at automating the testing efforts. You're definitely looking at setting up monitoring. And you're looking at, as a result of all of this, you're looking at frequent releases. You've probably also started dabbling around with the cloud a bit. You've put some workloads on the cloud. This is what doing DevOps means. Now, doing DevOps is very different from doing DevOps at scale, because what you're doing at one place has to be multiplied, scale up into tens and hundreds of instances across technology stacks, across technology silos, across multiple stakeholders, across egos. And that is not an easy task. You know what I'm talking about. And when you start scaling DevOps, you realize that enterprise architectures are very, very complex. These are the famous star death microservice architectures at Amazon and Netflix. You can keep zooming in and you will see that these are real network architecture and microservice architecture at one point of time used by these giants. You also realize as you start scaling DevOps across the organization that you have to cater for technology stacks from the data center to the cloud to serverless and anything and everything in between. And you have to deal with a plethora of tools and technologies. I have personally been into organizations where and this was an insurance giant in South Africa, where they had in one cubicle high availability of power devices, UPSs, in a load balancing model. And why they did that? Because that particular machine, that particular Windows servers was running some COM components of which they didn't even have the source code of. And if that machine died, some functionality in the entire application would have conked off, and there was no way of bringing it back unless you re-architected the whole thing. So large enterprises like this are dealing with these sorts of complexities across tools, across technology stacks. And also diverse team topologies. Maybe some of the teams are very matured in agile implementation. Some of the teams have started dabbling with it. Some of the teams run stand-ups which are 45 minutes long. Some of the teams have retros with 0 action items. Things like that. I'm sure you've all lived through those things. I don't have to talk to you about this. Hopefully it does make sense to you. So what does doing DevOps at scale really entail? Let's dig a little deeper into all of these concepts. So scaling DevOps is a lot more than tools and technologies. Let's go one by one. It means implementing Agile at scale. It means getting your entire organization to one vocabulary, to one set of standards. Standards of everything, going from what is a user story, how do you give story points, what is definition of done, what does a release really mean, how can you control the release from a central tool like a Jira or whatever you're using. All of those stuff standardized across the organization. That's implementing Agile at scale. When you start doing that and start putting in some of the DevOps principles in play, you realize that you need some new roles and responsibilities. Maybe somebody like an environment manager, maybe somebody like a DevRel or a developer relation, maybe a community builder. And why do you need these roles? Because now the way you deliver software is changing. You're going faster to the market and you're engaging with the market more. So you need community builders and DevRels who can go out there and talk about your integrations, talk about your platform to the world, to the community, and engage with them. Talk at conferences, talk at events, do webinars like this, and a whole 9 yards. You're also talking about deconstructing organizational structures, because as you start scaling out DevOps, you realize that this cannot be done in a separate DevOps team sitting somewhere in its own ivory tower. Then you've created one more silo out of the 20 silos that were already existing. So you deconstruct the organization into some shape of Spotify or whatever you want to call it. You take the best principles from all of these great organizations and then you apply it in your context. That's how you deconstruct the organization structures. You're also talking about institutionalizing new ways of working across the enterprise, because as the enterprise starts moving into the agile way of working, starts using some of these fundamentals of smaller environments, faster rollouts, create decommission environment at will, you will need to change the ways of working of the environment. And along with that, coupled is obviously the upskilling of the workforce. Upskilling of the workforce, preferably through motivation. Let's look at some other things. It's reworking the vendor relationships, because all large organizations tend to work with a bunch of vendors. When you work with a bunch of vendors and you start embarking on a DevOps story, all the vendors in some shape and form have to subscribe to that philosophy and have to adopt DevOps in their own areas where they serve you as well. Then it's about measuring the right metrics, from business metrics to technology metrics. It's about a lot of communication, both upstream communication and downstream communication, of why we are doing DevOps, what's the reason for putting in of so much time, money, effort, investment in this, why are we pushing you to upskill, why are we jumping suddenly to the cloud when nobody else is doing it in our niche, super niche area of technology. All of that needs a lot of communication. And that means it's driving changes through a mix of consensus and directive. Both important, top down, bottom up. And a lot more based on the current maturity of the enterprise. So that, in a nutshell, is what means to scale DevOps. Hopefully, it all makes sense to you. Now, what mental strengths does it take to achieve all of this from the people who are driving the DevOps strategy or the DevOps initiatives? So let's look at scaling DevOps and then let's map it to mental strengths one by one. So implementing Agile at scale, you need to be an influencer. Think a TikToker. You have to do some of those dances, right? What do I mean by that? Is that you have to go in and influence the developer community, the testing community, all of them to jump onto this bandwagon of Agile. Why? Because they might not understand it fully yet, but you have an eye on the end goal and you know why it should be done. New roles, new R&R. To be able to create that, you need to be obviously a visionary who has an eye of what is going on in the outside industry, and you can then pick and choose some of those things as relevant to your organization. That's what a visionary does. Deconstructing organization silos, you're dealing with fragile egos. These are people who have run their part of the organization for years. When you deconstruct and remerge or change the DNA of the organization, there are bound to be ego issues. Learn how to dealing with them needs a lot of mental strength. Institutionalizing new ways of working across the enterprise, you're basically telling a WebSphere admin who has been doing that job phenomenally well for the past 20 years that, buddy, we are going to change the underlying infrastructure and the underlying technology. WebSphere is going to go out of league in the next 1 to 2 years. You will have to upskill yourself. You will have to learn new things, and that means going beyond your comfort zone. it's also about acceptance of situation, that the thing that I am an expert at might not exist in the next 6 to 18 months. So if I am serious about my career, I need to learn new things and unlearn a lot of things. Communicating that, convincing that, putting that out with conviction is a lot of mental strength. All right. Scaling DevOps with reworking the vendor relationship, short-term loss, long-term benefit. Some of the vendors might not subscribe to the automation that you're asking them to do because it means reducing their workforce temporarily. You have to work with vendors who are intelligent enough to understand that, to take a short-term loss, but look at a long-term benefit in terms of more opportunities to automate stuff across your estate. Measuring the right metrics. Now, spiritual metrics are straight lines. What does it mean? If you zoom out and look at the data, it will suddenly start making sense. And that's why you have to measure the right metrics. Communication, we talk about conscious listening, which is not just listening or hearing, and I'll talk about this more in the next couple of slides. Driving changes through a mix of consensus and directive, that needs a lot of clarity of thought, and that is coming from mental strength. Because unless you are absolutely crystal clear of what needs to be done, you will not be able to drive this change successfully, top down and bottom up. And of course, a lot more. So now let's come to how spiritual practices can help with all of these mental strengths that I've spoken about. Let's bring everything back home now. So how do you get started with building these mental strengths? So I'll talk about two very fundamental concepts: conscious questioning and conscious listening. What does conscious questioning mean to a developer, to a QA, to a product manager? So let's say you go to work on a Monday morning. You can ask questions like, hey, how was your weekend? What pet projects are you working at home? Did you watch the game last weekend? I thought it was an amazing game. How's your pet doing? And if you're getting really courageous, how's your mother-in-law doing? These are conscious questions. This is not an interrogation. How was your weekend? What's the project? Did you watch the game? How's your pet? How's your mother-in-law? It's not that. So these are conscious questions. And then very well coupled with conscious questions is conscious listening, where when they start describing the weekend, you don't jump into the next question. Yeah, that's fine, but what project are you working on? You say, wow, that's great. Tell me more about it. That's amazing how you automated used Raspberry Pi to automate your watering system in your garden. Tell me more about it. Where did you get the Raspberry Pi from? How did you do the configuration? Are you using any cloud components? This is very interesting. Go on. Tell me more. You're listening, not just hearing. So this is how you start developing some of the mental strengths. You probably have heard of this guy, Simon Sinek. He very famously says, success is energy into competence raised to the power of empathy. And that is effectively what we are trying to build. Empathy. Empathy towards people, process, and tools. Because that is how you scale up a successful DevOps implementation across the organization. Let me give you some case studies now. So there was a poll at one of the leading financial services organizations in Europe, and a leader that I used to work with in my previous job, she got the Most Love Executive Award. And I met a number of people and asked her, why did you vote for her? And almost everybody said the same thing in some other shape or form. They said, she's a great listener. Now, they didn't say she's a great problem solver. They didn't say she's a great technically sound person. They didn't say she is great at Java or she's great at Ansible. All they said was, she's a great listener, which goes back to my point of empathy. The moment you listen and do conscious listening, half of the problems are solved right there, because the person who's telling you the problem will tell you the solution as well. So that's one case study that I've seen. The next one. So there was a senior manager in one of the accounts, and he had to be moved out and another person replaced him. And things were going well for a couple of weeks, 4 or 6 weeks. And then we got a feedback from the client saying they're not happy with this person, they need him replaced. And that was kind of a surprise, because there was no escalations on any of the calls. He seemed to be picking up things well. Everything seemed to be going okay, but yet we got this feedback. And then I went and did a deep dive on the situation. I went and met a couple of people. I asked them, hey, is there a technical issue with the guy? No technical issue. Is there any other issue? Is he not able to deliver things well? No, he's delivering things very well. In fact, he has exceeded expectations. Okay, fair enough. Then is he not being able to manage the team well? No, he's actually quite good at managing the team. And we have a globally distributed team. He does a good job. He gets the job done. So what is the issue, I asked. And the answer I got was, he's missing the warmth. What does that mean? It means even though he was getting the results that were required, people were not feeling very comfortable with him because he was missing the empathy angle, or a little low on the empathy angle. He was missing the warmth. Another mental strength to build. Now, how do you go about building all of this? I'll give you a roadmap. Getting started, go to YouTube and look for a 10-minute guided meditation. You can pick up any one. Step 2, you can look at one of these apps. You can look at Calm, Headspace, 10% Happier. Any one of these apps will give you a lot of self-meditation thing. You can go and subscribe or do one of these courses. It could be a Wim Hof method, it could be the art of living, anything. I remember when I was early on in my career, about 2 or 3 years experience, my manager sent me to an art of living course. And I had no clue what to do there. And I came back and I said, hey, why are you sending me to a spirituality course? I've got 3 years of experience. All I need to do is to learn some technical skills. At that point, I was learning Perl. I said, I'm about to do a certification in Perl. I need to do this course. Help me do that. He was like, chuck the Perl, you learn it anyways. Go and do this. I did the course, didn't understand much. I went up to him and I said, I've done what you asked me to do. Now, can you please explain why you sent me to that course? And I still remember his answer very, very clearly. His name was Prashant Brahmankar. He said, you will not appreciate this today, but sometime in life, when you grow up and you encounter a roadblock, you will know where the solution lies. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I will leave you with 2 quotes. The first one is, real meditation practice is how we live our lives moment to moment to moment. Meditation is not something which is done at 6 a.m. in the morning or 15 minutes before you go back to sleep. That's the start of meditation. But meditation is done on what decisions we take, how we conduct ourselves with others as we live our lives every single day. That is the real meaning of meditation. And if you can understand what I'm trying to say, as you start doing this kind of meditation, as you start being mindful of what the other person is saying, really do conscious listening, not hearing, and then think and respond, a lot of issues that crop up, not just in DevOps implementation, but any technology or interhuman interactions will automatically start to wear away. I think you understand what I'm trying to say by this. Now, I do not meditate every single day in the traditional sense that I don't spend an hour, 2 hours meditating every single day. I don't. But I go back to the previous one and try and live every single moment being present, especially when I know that I have to deal with a difficult situation at work or at home. That's where I go back to. Hope these things made sense to you. You can always contact me on LinkedIn. I would highly recommend, if this talk made sense, you can look up one of my books, head off to my YouTube channel, and I will be around to answer any questions that you might have. The best way to reach me is to connect with me on LinkedIn. And thank you so much, DevOps Community of Practice Canada, for giving me the opportunity to come here and talk about this topic, which is very, very close to my heart. And as I embark on DevOps transformations at my current organizations, in the past and in the future ones as well, I hope that you do some takeaways from this talk. And if you have any questions, I'll be around to answer them as well. Thank you so much.